Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, John. God bless the great state of California. And as you rightly noted, God help the great state of California. But I appreciate the men and women here who are hearty souls standing for principle. It is great to be with you. You know, I spent all week in Washington, D.C. So it is great to be back in America. I'm here with my wife, Heidi. And our two little girls, Catherine, who's 4. And then Caroline, who's 7. Where's Caroline? Not here yet. So Caroline is en route. Now, Heidi is a native Californian. She grew up here on the Central Coast, San Luis Obispo. And her family still lives in San Luis Obispo. We were just up at their place yesterday for a birthday party where her dad, on Father's Day, her dad turned 7. So I will tell you, back when I was elected to the Senate, right after Election Day in 2012, our eldest daughter, Caroline, she looked at Heidi and she said, "Mommy, I don't think you can tell people you're a Californian anymore." But Heidi still does. I'll tell you, Heidi, she is beautiful, she is brilliant, she is an incredible businesswoman. She is a fantastic mom to our 2 little girls. She has really lousy eyesight. But she is my best friend in the entire world, and I love her so much. You know, I'm thrilled to be out here with you. These are not ordinary times. This is not just another season in politics. The challenges facing this country right now are extraordinary. It is now or never. I think the stakes have never been higher. And I want to come to you with a word of encouragement, a word of hope and optimism. People are waking up. People are waking up in California and all across this country. People are waking up, and this country is on the verge of turning around. Today, for the first time in history, a majority of Americans believe that our kids will have a worse life than we did. 65%. That has never been true in the history of our country until right now. I think the central issue in 2016 is going to be reigniting the promise of America. Getting back to that fundamental commitment that our kids would have a better life than we did. And their kids would have a better life than they did. That optimism that formed the state of California, that formed our country. How do we do it? 3 simple steps. Number 1, we bring back jobs and growth and opportunity. My number 1 priority in office has been economic growth, because economic growth is foundational to everything else. You want to turn around unemployment or the national debt or the deficit. You want to rebuild our military. You want to reform and preserve Social Security and Medicare. You've got to have growth. With growth, all of that can be done. Without growth, none of it can. And the men and women here understand cause and effect. That every time that our federal government pursues out-of-control spending and taxes and regulations, that the result is economic stagnation and misery and malaise. And on the flip side, every time we pursue tax reform and regulatory reform, the result is incredible economic growth. We saw that in the 1920s. We saw it in the 1960s, and we saw it in the 1980s. Tax reform. We right now spend roughly $500 billion a year on tax compliance. On lawyers and accountants, all dead weight losses. We say in Texas, that doesn't produce a single truck or tortilla. And the very best tax reform, we need to adopt a simple flat tax. Yes. So that every American can fill out his or her taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. There are about 90,000 employees at the IRS. We need to padlock that building. Take all 90,000 and put them down on our southern border. Now, to our friends in the media, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But think about it for a second. Imagine you traveled thousands of miles through the blazing sun. You're swimming across the Rio Grande. The first thing you see is 90,000 IRS agents. You turn around and go home and study. And then the second key to economic growth, regulatory reform. You know, a couple of years ago, I was out in West Texas. I asked some folks there, I said, what's the difference between regulators and locusts? I said, well, the thing is, you can't use pesticide on the regulators. And this old West Texas farmer, he leaned back, he said, want to bet? And we have seen over the last 6.5 years, regulators descending from Washington, devouring small businesses, devouring farms and ranches. Sadly, here in California, your home state helps in the process. Yes. And regulators are strangling the ability to create jobs and opportunity to help lift people up to the American dream. Whether it is the EPA and waters of the United States, whether it is the CFPB or the alphabet soup of Washington. And the most important regulatory reform. We need to repeal every word of Obamacare. Yeah. We need common sense health care reform that makes health insurance personal and portable and affordable and keeps government from getting between us and our God. The second key, and before we get to the second key, I'm obliged to introduce the Princess Lady Caroline. And to avoid trouble at home, I especially have to introduce my mother-in-law, Suzanne. She and her husband, Dr. Peter Nelson, have had a dental practice here for many decades. The second key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to defend our constitutional rights. Yes. All of them. Yes. We need to defend the First Amendment. Free speech, and especially religious liberty. Religious liberty has never been more under assault from government than it is today. And we need a new generation of patriots who stand up and say, we will defend the right of every American to seek out and worship the Lord God Almighty with all of our hearts, minds, and souls, free of the government getting in the way. Amen. We need to defend the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. A few weeks ago, we were up in New Hampshire at a gun range, and they had a full range of full autos, including one tripod-mounted, massive, full-auto machine gun that my darling wife Heidi, petite, 5'2", California blonde, mounted, and it was belt-fed, unloaded it, wearing a pink baseball cap that said "Armed and Fabulous." Suzanne, this is what happens when you let your babies grow up to marry Texas. We need to defend the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, our rights to privacy. How many of y'all have your cell phones on? Let me ask you, please leave your cell phones on. I want to make sure President Obama hears every word we say. We need to defend the 10th Amendment. Yeah. Or as President Obama calls it, the what? The fundamental protection that says the powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. That means there are a whole host of areas the federal government has no business sticking its nose. And chief among them is education. And we need to repeal every word of Common Core. Education is too important for it to be dictated by unelected bureaucrats in Washington. It needs to be at the state level, or even better, at the local level, where parents have direct control and influence over the education of our kids. The third key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to restore America's leadership. For 6.5 years, we have seen the consequences of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. Leading from behind doesn't work. Today, our friends and allies no longer trust us. And our enemies no longer fear us. Instead of a president who boycotts Prime Minister Netanyahu, imagine America standing unapologetically alongside the nation of Israel. Imagine a commander-in-chief standing up and saying, "We will defeat radical Islamic terrorism." And we will call it by its name. Imagine a president who says, that would be the president calling in. We understand there's a large assemblage of people seeking the peaceable overthrow of the government.
Put him on hold.
I actually think that for the next 18 months we could just invite the president to play golf. The country would be safe. Imagine a president who says under no circumstances will the nation of Iran, whose theocratic Ayatollah leads chants of death to America, under no circumstances will Iran be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. Now, some of y'all may be thinking, all of this makes sense to me. This is basic common sense. But can we do it? Are we too far gone? Is it too late? Can we turn the country around? You know, the book of Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are is very much like the late 1970s. I think the parallels between Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter are uncanny. Same failed economic policies. Same misery, stagnation, and malaise. Same feckless and naive foreign policy. In fact, the exact same countries, Russia and Iran, openly laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. You know, the one person in America thrilled with the job Barack Obama's doing is Jimmy Carter. Now, why does that analogy give me so much hope and optimism? Because we know how that story ended. You know, a couple of weeks ago, Heidi and I were at church, and our pastor was preaching. It was during the NBA playoffs. It was back when the Rockets had a chance before Golden State whooped us. Yeah, but even better, then Golden State turned around and whipped Cleveland, and I cheered for that. But, you know, our pastor was talking about, have you ever noticed how if you're watching a really tense sports game, you might be at the edge of the seat in your couch, you might be really on pins and needles. But yet, if you've DVR'd it, and you've already read the sports pages, and you know the score, you're never nervous. If you're watching a taped game, if you know the score, you may be down 20 points in the fourth quarter, but if you know your team wins, you look at it and go, wow, we're getting ready to see one heck of a run. Well, what our pastor reminded us then is, we know the end of the story. And in the 1970s, when Jimmy Carter was president, what happened is we saw a grassroots movement begin to sweep this country. Millions of men and women. It began here in California. Millions of men and women who came together and became the Reagan Revolution.
Yeah.
And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. It came from the men and women in this room. It came from millions of Americans who've been living their lives, many had never been involved in politics, who looked up one day and said, what on earth is going on? And it swept in like a tidal wave and turned this country around. We went from stagnation to booming economic growth. We went from weakness on the world stage to winning the Cold War. The reason I'm optimistic is the same thing is happening right now today. You know, we launched our campaign a couple months ago. The New York Times immediately wrote, Cruz cannot win. Because the Washington elites despise it. Kind of thought that was the whole point of the campaign. Look, if you think things in Washington are going great, that we need to keep going in the same trajectory, just fiddle around the edges, then I ain't your guy. But if you think it's fundamentally broken, that there is a bipartisan corruption in Washington, career politicians in both parties, who aren't listening to the American people, and we need to bring power out of Washington and back to we the people. That's what this campaign is all about. We went on a barnstorming tour immediately after we launched. We went to Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. 3 states picked at random. And every place we went was standing room. Local press reported the crowds coming out for us were much larger and in many instances double the size of any other candidate in the field. Now the local reporters couldn't figure it out. They were completely flabbergasted. No, this isn't who we said's supposed to win. Well, you know, the times went on, they said, okay, now maybe the grassroots will be the first. But you ain't going to have any money. The Washington elites control all the money. And they're with other candidates. They're with other candidates that aren't going to rock the boat, aren't going to stop the gravy train. Well, we launched on March 23rd. We had 1 week to go in our first fundraising board. We set a goal. We wanted to raise $1 million a week. Now, frankly, I thought that was a pretty audacious goal. Put $1 million in the bank in a week would be a statement. We're going to have the resources to go the distance. Well, I'm sorry to tell you, we failed in that goal. We didn't raise $1 million in a week. We raised $1 million in 1 day. By the third day, we raised $2 million. And by the end of the week, we had raised over $4.3 million. That consisted of over 51,000 contributions, people from all 50 states, who went to tedcruz.org. 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 That's tedcruz.org. 95% of those contributions were $100 or less. Now, to put that in context, $4.3 million in the opening week is more money than any Republican candidate has raised in the opening week in modern history. Yay! It is double what Mitt Romney raised in 2012 in his opening week. It is much more than double what John McCain raised in 2008, and both of those candidates had all the Washington money behind them. They ain't with us in this campaign, but the strength of this campaign are the men and women gathered here. Yes. I told you I'm optimistic, and the reason I'm optimistic is because of each of you. I'm optimistic because all of us, we love our kids, we love our grandkids, and we're standing up to turn this country around, to get back to the principles that built America, that made America strong. You know, for all of us, freedom isn't some abstract concept that we study at school. It's not from a junior high textbook. It's personal. It's real in our family. For me, I think of my father. Now, yesterday was Father's Day. My dad was born in Cuba. He grew up in Cuba and fought the Cuban Revolution. As a teenager, he fought against Batista. And he was thrown in prison and tortured when he was 17 years old. Army guards, soldiers, beat my father halfway dead. When he was in that dark and damp prison cell that reeked of blood, he didn't know if he would live or die. My dad tells me at the time that he remembers thinking, I don't have any children. No family depends on me. It doesn't matter if I live or die. And yet, thankfully, God had different plans for my father. He was released from that prison cell. And he escaped to America. When he came to America, he was just 18 years old. He couldn't speak English. He had $100 that was sewn into his underwear. And he got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. He worked full time. He paid his way through school. He went on to start a small business. Today, he's a pastor based out of Dallas. Now, my whole life, my father has been my hero. But you know what I find most incredible about his story? How commonplace it is. Every single one of us here has a story just like that in our backgrounds. Some of us, it's us. Others, it's our parents. Others, it's our great-great-great-grandparents. What ties Americans together is we are all the children of those who risked everything.
That's right.
That is the fundamental DNA of what it means to be an American, to value liberty and opportunity above all else. And that's why I'm optimistic, because the American people are rising up to say, we will not go quietly into the night. Like our fathers and our forefathers before them, we will stand and fight to secure the blessings of liberty to our children and to their children. That's what we're doing together, and I am honored, I am humbled to stand with you as we preserve that last best hope for man.